Today I'm going to show you how to change the CVs on a given locomotive using my NCE Power Cab hooked up to a programming track. The very first thing that you need to do is to make sure that you've got the correct locomotive selected. So now we're going to select 1500, enter. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is you have to go to the directions that came with that locomotive so that you know what CVs that you want to change in order to make changes to either the volume of the master volume of the locomotive, or the whistle or horn, or the bell, which in this case it's CV 128, 29, or 130. First, I'm going to show you how we're going to do it set up on a programming track, which is where it is now. So we would just go down here to this program button and say we push it 4 times and it goes to use the programming track, and hit enter. It then turns the power off to that track temporarily, and you tell it that you want to change the CV by pushing number 2. Then you tell it what CV you want to change. Let's do the horn first, which was number 129. So we punch in 129. Look at the screen to make sure the number is correct, because if you push in the wrong number, you're going to be programming something you don't want to program. Then you hit enter, and it then comes up with the amount that that particular CV is set at now. It takes a little while sometimes, but right now it's set at 220. So obviously I like my horn set at 220. Let's set it at about half of that now, just to show you the difference. We're going to set it at 100 and enter. So now we have set the volume of the horn at 100 instead of 220. So if I go down here and hit the escape button on that program button, and I can now go and try the horn. As you can see, it's kind of quiet. Okay, now let's go set it back up again. Again, I'm going to press the programming track 4 times to program on the programming track. Hit enter to say that that's what I want to do. Hit number 2, I want to change the CV. What CV do I want to change? Number 129. And enter, and it will then read what it is now set at. We had just set it at 100, so it should come up at 100. I like my horn on this particular locomotive to be set at about 220. 220, and enter. Now if I go down and escape again from this programming, go back to running the locomotive, and I hit the horn. Okay, now it's considerably higher. Okay, now let's go and do the bell. If I go again and hit it 4 times to go to use the program track and hit enter. And again, I want to change the CV. And this time we're going to go to the bell, which is CV number 130. I punch in 130. Again, make sure the number on the screen is what you want, or you're going to program something you don't want to program. And hit enter. And it's going to look at what it is set at now. It is now set at 30. Alright, let's go and set it at something considerably higher. Let's set it at 70. And then go out of the program by hitting the escape program down at the bottom. And now we'll do the bell. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a little bit too loud. So I'm going to turn the bell back off. Let's go back and reprogram it down to what I had it originally, which I think was 30. And then we'll go hit that program again 4 times to get to the program track. Enter. CV, what number CV? Number 130. Don't make sure the numbers are correct on the screen, or you're going to program something you don't want. hit enter. The locomotive moves just a tiny bit, telling you that it's now reading that CV, and it's set at 70. Let's go back down to 30 and enter. Now we can escape the programming portion and go back to the running and do the bell. Now that's much more acceptable. Okay. The next thing people like to change on their CVs, the most popular one, would be the voltage starting. The voltage that the locomotive gets when you go to number 1 on the speed. So we are now going to hit the programming 4 times again to do it on the programming track. Say enter, that's what I want to do. I want to change the CV. It happens to be number 2 for the start on most locomotives, not all, but on this one. I'm going to set it at 2, and it's going to look and say, okay, number 2 is set at 2. Let's set it at 30, which is much too high, but let's do it just for the sake of seeing what happens. And we'll hit enter, and we'll escape. Now we're going to push the speed up to 1, and that locomotive should take off. It does. See, much too fast. Okay, that's much too fast for a starting voltage. Let's go back and set it at 2 like where it was. Program. On the programming track, hit enter. We're going to change the CV. We're going to change CV number 2. We want to know what it's set at. It'll now read it. It's set at 30, which is too much voltage for a starting. We're going to set it back to 2, where it was. That seemed to work good for me. I'm going to hit enter there. I'm going to hit escape the programming track and go back to running. Now if I hit 1, see that? It just moves nice and slow. Maybe even that's a little too high. That's acceptable. Okay. The difference now I'm going to show you when you go and try to program a locomotive on the main. Here we would just hit that program button once. It says program on the main. And you would hit enter. And it checks to make sure which locomotive you want to program on the main. Because if you got 6 of them out there, you don't want to be programming the wrong one. This makes sure that you've got the right one that you're going to be programming on the main. So you accept that. And then you hit number 2 and say, okay, I want to change the bell. The bell was number 130. So let's change the bell sound. 1, 3, 0, enter. Alright, it does not give you the value. You kind of have to guess. Let's go back and set it at something that we know is much too high. Like say, let's set it at 60 and enter. Okay. Now we can escape the programming and hit the bell. Okay, and that's louder than I want. So the only difference here was that it didn't tell me what it was set at before. You have to kind of remember or write it down. And so let's go back and program on the main again, and the correct locomotive, and we're going to do 2, and we're going to do the bell, which was CV number 130. And now you have to remember it was set at 60, which was too high, so let's go back and set it down to about 30. Again, you have to either have written it down or know what it is. It doesn't tell you what it's set at now. And you can see the locomotive moved a little bit to let you know that it accepted that change on a CV. Go back to the running, and now we can do the bell. Now it's at an acceptable amount. So that shows you the difference when you're programming something on the main or on the programming track. However, you will notice that I have, even though we said programming on the main, I was programming on my program track, even though I was using the button program on the main. I like to do that Sometimes it's quicker and easier to program on the main if you remember all the numbers. However, there is always a chance of hitting the wrong CV number and programming something you didn't want to, or have the wrong locomotive chosen. However, one time I did. I was programming on the main and I hit a CV number and I put in a value, and apparently I didn't put in the correct CV number. And when I hit enter, 4 locomotives on my layout took off. So that's the reason I still like to use the programming track, whether I'm using program on the main or program on the programming track. That way I'm sure of getting things right in the first place. So that kind of concludes how I would program a locomotive on the main or on a programming track using the NCE Power Cab hooked up directly to the programming track.